Welcome to the Talk Spot. This is Marcus, and today I'm joined by Brian Dunning, host of Skeptoid.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
All right, perfect. So tell us a little bit about your background and your work today. Like, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so I was in back in the Stone Age. I was in college I was double majoring in computer science and film production, and I finally got my certificate in writing for film and television. Never worked in the field, never worked much in computer science, a little bit, mostly did software and boring stuff like that until podcasting became a thing, kind of around 2005, 2006 or so. And it's like the clouds opened up. And it's like, wow, here's the perfect combination of the science topics that I'm interested in and the opportunity to do some entertainment related production work. And so I started doing a few episodes of the Skeptoid podcast, and very fortunately for me, it seemed to resonate with an audience, and has just grown ever since. It's become my full-time job and has grown into a nonprofit. We're producing web series, documentary films, educational materials, all from a podcast. And of course, the podcast is still kind of that central thread running through the whole thing. It's where I still spend most of my time. But it's just I'm so fortunate to have been able to put together a career like this, such as it is.
Would you say with podcasting, would you say that it's gone more mainstream as time has gone by? Because I feel like you mentioned, like the mid 2000s, right? I feel like I had heard of the term podcasting, and I knew what it meant, but I feel like popularity wise, I feel like it was only been the last maybe 4 or 5 years where I've really everyday people that I meet will actually bring up, oh, I listen to this podcast or I listen to that podcast, and it seems like podcasting has become very mainstream. Is that your opinion too? Like, have you kind of noticed the shift a little bit?
It's certainly, there's been a shift. It's not where it should be. Back in 2006, when I started my podcast, most people didn't even know what they were. They didn't even know the word. And today, most people have heard of it, but still, I think only a small minority of people actually listen to them regularly, which is sad because it's such great content, and it's the ability to listen to it. Time-shifted radio. It's just like having a TiVo at your house. Nobody sits down and watches live television now, and it should be the same for audio content. And the more people that become aware of it, the better for them, the better for the industry. It's certainly not a get-rich-quick scheme, but it's rewarding to produce the good content, and that reward only comes from more people listening. So I'm always trying to get people to understand and appreciate podcasts more.
Like, how many years in would you say before, I don't want to say, made it, so to speak, but how many years in, or how long were you in before you were like, wow, like this is like, I'm actually getting listeners and this feels cool and this is exciting. Like, did it take a little while for that to kind of hit home for you?
Yeah, I can tell you exactly when that happened. My first episode was on October 3rd, 2006. And, I got enough feedback from people and people emailing me topic ideas and everything that I kept it going through the end of the year. And then in January 2007, so that's 3 months in, it moved to the front page of iTunes and exploded overnight. Didn't explode. The listenership went up by about 10 times to about 40,000 people, just by making it onto the front page of iTunes. So that was really kind of when I realized, oh, I should probably keep doing this, and this might turn into something real.
Wow. So I wanted to ask you, how would you describe the word skeptic? Like, what does that term actually mean to you?
Yeah, it's a problematic term, to be sure, because it has such a negative connotation. And the way that it's used in common speech is someone who's cynical or a denying about things, like, we'll say a global warming skeptic or something, when, in the science usage, that's the opposite meaning of the word. In fact, I would choose a different name for my podcast if I could go back in time. I wouldn't call it Skeptoid. I would come up with something, like the Urban Legends Show or something like that. In science parlance, skepticism is simply the process of demanding a higher standard of evidence. Someone says, I saw a Bigfoot. We don't go, oh, well, that proves Bigfoot is real. The skeptical perspective is like, okay, that's interesting, but let's see some evidence before we accept that. And kind of a great example from popular culture, something that everyone would be familiar with, is, you should eat kale and to get perfect health. Many people just embrace that, and now kale is super popular. But a skeptical perspective looks at it and says, it's no better than any other vegetable and not as good as a lot of them. So the skeptic does not accept that kale is some sort of miracle superfood. There's one example. We apply skepticism to just about anything and everything in pop culture. That's what my show is all about. A different subject each week.
So I have some rapid questions. I wanted to just hear what your opinions are about them. So I have, what are your opinions about the El Chupacabra, mind control, 9/11, and ghosts? And what is it about each of those topics that attracts people to them? And that's kind of a heart of a number of questions I want to ask you later, is what is it about those topics, or any topics, that really, I guess you could say, exists on the fringe, but yet somehow they have, a following? I mean, all of those topics. I mean, Bigfoot, for example, I'm sure you know far more about this than I do, but there's a whole cottage industry about Bigfoot.
Absolutely.
There's TV shows about it, about people catching Bigfoot and killing Bigfoot. And
where I live in Central Oregon here, I live in Bend. About half the brands of microbrews are named Bigfoot, Bigfoot Ale or whatever. The local Bigfoot club is large and active, and 100% believers that this is a real animal running around out there. And, of course, all the evidence is against it. There's not a single bit of evidence that supports the existence of Bigfoot. And there's, substantial zoological and environmental reasons to believe that it does not exist. So, we don't prove a negative, but we've got a pretty darn good idea. And yet people believe it. People believe it passionately. As you point out, for all of these stories and many, many more, there is nothing so strange that it does not have a very passionate following. That's one of the big lessons I've learned from 12 years of doing a show about these subjects.
Well, I guess maybe let's dive a little bit more into 9/11. I guess you'd call it the truth movement. I guess I know that's what they call themselves. And I feel like for myself, 10 years ago, I could really understand the argument, I feel like, for 9/11 being a, quote, inside job, right? To an extent, because you see, the Iraq war, the Afghanistan war, and you hear, talks about, me think, okay, maybe I could see the connections. But now here we are, 17 years later, and I don't know. I mean, I know people still talk about 9/11, and they especially talk about Building 7. And I saw that you even did a video about that, the fact that a lot of people believe that it was controlled demolition, and that there was supposed to be another plane or whatever. There's supposed to be another terrorist act that was going to destroy Building 7. And I don't know. And now I just think it's like, well, if it was an inside job, because that's ultimately what the belief is. If you believe, whatever, that holograms really crash into the trade centers, and then it was controlled demolition and they exploded after that. You believe, Towers or Building 7 was an inside job, whatever. Ultimately, the whole belief is that the United States faked these attacks so that we can go to war, right? Mm-hmm. And now I just kind of look at that and say, like, really? What did we get out of that? It's not like we took all of Iraq's oil.
Yeah, well, yeah. What we would have got, I know. Did it make our oil cheap? No. It it basically doubled our gasoline prices. I don't know where they get that idea. There is no group of conspiracy theorists more passionate than the 9/11 truthers. They are the ones who are most likely to get violent, to make all kinds of death threats. To this day, I get death threats every single day over email, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, from 9/11 truthers, every day. And it's been how many years? 17 years now. The 9/11 truthers it strikes a chord at people so deep and so organically in their body that it dominates their lives in many cases. That's, I don't want to get too far afield on a sidebar, but that's one of the things that makes one of these delusional disorders something that is diagnosable and requires treatment, as opposed to most run-of-the-mill conspiracy theorists can walk around and live a normal life and be functioning members of society. What puts people over the line, making them truly sick, is their inability to integrate this into a normal, healthy lifestyle. For the people who obsess all day over 9/11 truth, who was this guy that was sending the bombs recently? You saw his van. I mean, his van was covered with stickers. This was somebody who was clearly diagnosable and could well have benefited from treatment. I get those people talking to me every single day. So they're a surprisingly large segment. Everything you can say about the 9/11 truth beliefs is trivially debunked. It's not hard to debunk anything. And again, it's one of these beliefs that has zero evidence supporting it. The best they can do is they say, well, this is consistent with that, or that's consistent with something. Or they have imaginary evidence, like this explosives residue that they believe was found in the debris. It's either made up evidence that does not exist and cannot be tested, or it's these anecdotes and the idea that it fits into an overall anti-government ideology, that the government is out to get us all. There's a lot of fascinating sociology, a lot of fascinating psychology behind these kind of really passionate conspiracy theories. It's clearly proven to be the part of my work that has got the most traction. That's why the publisher came to me and wanted me to write this book on conspiracy theories, was because of all the ones that I've talked about on the podcast and how engaged people get about those. By far, they are not my favorite urban legends. They're fairly distasteful to me, but that's the one people want to talk about a lot, is these conspiracy theories.
Well, I mean, I could see with something like Bigfoot or, El Chupacabra, the Loch Ness Monster, or, I mean, I'm sure dozens more the urban legend monsters, right? And to me, I mean, I can see what you're saying, that, I could believe in Bigfoot, but have a normal job. Like, I could go to work every day, and, if somebody says something like, oh, Bigfoot's fake, I might think to myself, I might mumble under my breath, like, oh, you're wrong. But, I think to myself, I don't know. I mean, I feel like it'd be less likely to get into a big fight and let it dominate my life. Where it's like what you're saying with 9/11. I mean, we're talking about, people dying and people that, regardless of like even what political side that you're on, I mean, there's reasons that, I could just see that there being a lot of emotions and being a lot of, just a lot of anger. And, people hear a couple things on YouTube, you see something like, I think it was the Pentagon when the plane crashed into the Pentagon. There was like a guy that was like a taxi driver that was near the Pentagon. And I guess he kind of, I mean, from my understanding, I mean, you probably know far more about this than I do, but he told one story, then he kind of like told a little bit of a different story. So people jump on that and they're like, oh, look at him, this guy, his story changed and blah, blah, blah. And they've gone really into super depth about this guy. And it's like, I mean, from what I've heard, that guy doesn't even want to talk about it. Like, he kind of said one thing one time, and then he had more time to process it and said something a little different. And then people started hounding him. So,
and suddenly he finds himself the focus of this great big movement of highly motivated individuals.
Yeah, exactly.
I sympathize with him.
I mean, I completely see that one. I guess another conspiracy theory that's maybe picking up traction maybe in the last 10 years or so is this idea of the like Illuminati, right? I mean, I don't know what
Hmm.
else to call it other than the Illuminati entertainment industry, and the fact that there's people on YouTube and I'm sure like on iTunes as well that have had a whole cottage industry talking about the Illuminati. You know, it's Jay-Z does this hand sign, or Beyonce does this, or Lady Gaga does that. What are your opinions about that conspiracy, and what do you think is so attractive about that to people?
So in the book, one of the chapters, I'm speaking of my book Conspiracies Declassified from 2018. One of the sections that the publisher wanted was a section on conspiracy theories about who secretly runs the world. So, there's chapters on the Knights Templar, the Rothschilds, the Bohemians, the Bilderbergers, and so forth and so on. And they said, well, where's the chapter on the Illuminati? And I said, well, the Illuminati is too vague. I mean, all of these groups that we just mentioned and others are the Illuminati, depending on who you talk to. So, it just depends on who the person is. Everyone has their own, the Illuminati are secretly running the world thing, but those Illuminati can be anyone from Jewish bankers to reptilian aliens to Knights Templar to, the businessmen and running around in the woods in San Francisco. There's just so many different versions of this story. And so I did not include a chapter on just called Illuminati because they're all the Illuminati.
Hmm. But I mean, you do believe that that it's like not real, right?
Oh, the idea that all the world governments have willingly given up their sovereignty to some secret shadow cabal for unclear reasons, I think, is ludicrous at face value. The idea that something of this magnitude happens and not a single person in the world knows about it is equally ludicrous at face value. So, I am not persuaded that there is a secret cabal that runs everything. I think that anyone who sits down and intellectually makes that conclusion probably needs to go back and retake high school civics. Or governments just don't work that way. World leaders just don't work that way.
Hmm. For that kind of belief, like what was it? I mean, I don't want to like necessarily put you on the spot or give like a specific date, let's say, but for let's say something like that, like the Illuminati and the Freemasons and all those things or all those groups, like what was it that actually that actually pushed that to the like forefront of like mainstream? Because I feel like 15 years ago, I don't even know how many people had even heard that term, Illuminati and the Bilderberg group and all that stuff. And now it seems like even like amongst young people, it seems very difficult to find a young person that hasn't heard of Illuminati. Like it just seems like it's mainstream now.
That kind of stuff has become more popular among young people, I think, largely because of the internet. I don't think that it has a larger share of the population. I don't believe that belief has a larger share of the population than it ever has. We can go back all the way through all the centuries, and we can see what the Illuminati belief at the time was, because there's always been such conspiracy theories out there and people who believe them. I think the reason that we see it now among younger people is because 20 years ago, students had access to what their friends knew, what they learned in class at school. There was no such thing as an internet where you had YouTube's misinformation at your fingertips all day long. So it's much more accessible now, but I don't believe a larger segment of people believe it. Even among the young people, more have heard of it now than they have, but I don't think more believe in it than they ever have. I do believe that that the reasons people believe in conspiracy theories are relatively consistent and not necessarily dependent on what technologies are available for disseminating information.
Well, what would you say is the consistent thread that actually, like, what is it that attracts people to conspiracy theories?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, whole books have been written on this and continue to be written on it. I would say in the shortest possible description, it comes down to a certain amount of paranoia being an evolved behavior for safety. The example that's usually given is this thing called agency detection, which is our brain's native tendency to look for a malevolent, deliberate purpose behind everyday random events. Which is the reason people started believing in gods. A cloud goes over the sun. They believe that there is some intelligent purpose behind that. The gods are angry and blotting out the sun, whatever it is. And how this came to be an evolved trait in our brains goes back to, again, the popular example is that the proto-humans are walking across the savannah. There's a rustling in the grass. Some of them who are more paranoid say, oh, it must be a saber-toothed cat, and they jump up a tree. Others say, oh, that's probably nothing. And sure enough, over time and over enough generations, those who climb a tree gradually become a larger part of the population, because those who say, oh, it's nothing, occasionally they do get killed by the saber-toothed cat. So a certain amount of paranoia is a safety mechanism that's evolved in not only humans, but animals as well. Animals are quite skittish. If you walk up to a wild animal, they're likely to turn and run away. That's because they have this evolved paranoia. They believe that there's a malevolent purpose in some strange creature walking up to them. Now, in the modern day, we don't necessarily have to worry about a saber-toothed cat in the grass. And yet we still have this native tendency to be paranoid about things. But what we also have is our intelligence interpreting our life experiences and kind of giving us a filter that we can put these native tendencies through. If I see a strange person, my native tendency might make me paranoid, but my life experience has taught me, hey, this person is probably not a threat, and I'm not too worried about it. So since we all have different life experience, we all have different education levels, environments we grew up in, people we grew up with, interpersonal relationships, news that we heard, we all have a very different, very complex set of filters by which we process all of this input. And that's why some people are way out there on the conspiracy theory belief, and some people are way at the other end and not at all worried about conspiracy theories. I mean, that's basically it in a nutshell.
Well, there's definitely a lot to unpack from what you just said. I mean, that does make sense where if people are, I mean, I guess it's probably something that you've even heard too. Like there's the line between, you should question what happens, or you should question a little bit the official story. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But then there's going too overboard. Like for example, let's say, it's 1963 and, John Kennedy just gets killed. And, there's real questions for that. You're like, wow, that, like what happened here? And then, Lee Harvey Oswald, him getting killed, this to me, that would say, okay, my spidey senses are going off. This sounds a little bizarre, right? And I can understand people wanting to know questions at that time. It's 1963, it's 1964. But, like you said, like, I mean, I'm sure there's been tons of people that have like dedicated themselves to studying the JFK assassination. Here we are, 55 years later or whatever. And it's like, are you going to be the one to crack the case? And now everybody's been implicated. George Herbert Walker Bush has been implicated, Lyndon Johnson, the mafia, the CIA. I mean, everybody's been implicated or whatever. Everybody is now a suspect. And, it's like, I mean, are you going to be the one to solve it? And if you are the one to solve it, if that actually is true, there was a conspiracy. The CIA was the one that killed him. Wouldn't they kill you then? If you're the one to discover it, and you message your friend on an email like, "Oh, I solved the JFK assassination." I mean, I don't even know if I'd want to be the guy to solve it in that case.
No, you hit on a great point. One of the episodes that I did of my podcast, in fact, addressed this exact question of should you question everything? Because I mean, a lot of people consider that kind of common wisdom. Everything should be open to question. We should question everything. We should question our leaders, question our laws, question whatever. And so I made an episode called "No, You Shouldn't Question Everything." And I came up with kind of 3 categories of things that you shouldn't question. Number 1, you shouldn't ask ridiculous questions. For example, as I'm walking down the sidewalk, is that next square in the sidewalk a hologram and I might fall through it? That's taking things to a ridiculous extreme. You should not waste your time asking ridiculous questions. The second category is things that are axiomatic. Does 2 + 2 = 4? Should I question that? There's a lot of things that are just kind of basic knowledge. I'm not saying they're above question or they shouldn't be questioned. It's just that it's a waste of your time to question them. Feel free, question whether 2 + 2 = 4 all day long. I'm not saying it's, religiously or dogmatically above being questioned. It's just a waste of your time to question things that are axiomatic. And the third one is what you're just talking about. Has it already been questioned to death? Don't waste your time questioning the JFK assassination, because the number of person hours that have been spent questioning that fruitlessly over the last 50, 60 years is insane. We're talking billions of hours have been put in by people trying to solve this non-crime that they believe happened. You are not likely to come up with something that nobody else ever has. No, it's not above being questioned, but it's a waste of your time to tread this same ground that's been trodden so many times before you. So I say, no, you shouldn't question everything. And those are kind of my 3 criteria for things you shouldn't question.
I mean, at this point, you would have a better chance of winning the lottery than actually just solving the JFK assassination. If it does need to be solved.
Probably true. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at least with the lottery, you can say whatever the odds are, it's 1 in 300 million, whatever the odds are.
Yeah.
But, people do win the lottery. It happens all the time. Somebody has to win the lottery. And, for JFK, it's, I'm sure there's people out there, if you ask them, they know, oh, it was Lyndon Johnson. We know it was him, of whatever in their mind, whatever evidence they have, they're like, I know it was him. But it's do you know it was him? And it also, it's very interesting the fact that you laid out those 3 categories, because it almost just seems like, okay, fine, let's say it was Lyndon Johnson. It was actually, he had the gun in his hand somehow. He was the actual real shooter in disguise. What does that change now? What does it alter now? Lyndon Johnson's been dead for 50 years. Or let's say if it was Herbert Walker Bush. The man is 92 years old and he's in a wheelchair. Are you going to throw him in jail?
Well, if he committed murder, there's no statute of limitations. Yeah, you'd throw him in jail.
I guess. I guess I just think to myself, is it really realistic that could even happen?
No, it's not realistic, because if that was a possibility, the real investigators would have discovered it decades ago. And I'm not kidding. It's been billions of person hours have been spent doubting the Warren Commission report and trying to find something wrong with it. And so far, nobody ever has found anything in all of that time. So, yeah, it's not going to happen.
Out of all the theories that you've interacted with, which one would you say actually bothers you the most, or which one is it that really just sets you off? I don't want to use the word trigger because that's so politically charged, but which one do you hear where you're like, oh my gosh, here we go again? You roll your eyes and, your blood pressure goes up a little bit. Is there such a theory that does that for you? I
would say the big pharma conspiracy, okay. Which incorporates so many different things. It extends to vaccine denial. This idea that there's some natural herb somewhere that will miraculously cure all cancers and every other disease, but it's being kept suppressed by the pharmaceutical companies, whose financial motivation is to keep everyone sick. So they give us these ineffective drugs. I hear it so often, and it's so popular. If you sit down at a table with a half dozen of your friends, half of them probably believe that. It's a very popular conspiracy theory, and like so many others, it's ridiculous at face value. That any company who's in business and desperately needing to compete against competitors would suppress the most profitable product in existence and try to make an even worse product than all of their competitors. I mean, and that's just from a business or economic perspective, how ludicrous that conspiracy theory is. And then you can also look at, like all conspiracy theories, you can look at the number of people who have to be in on it, who have to be kept paid off or killed to stay quiet over many decades, or in the case of the Big Pharma conspiracy, over centuries. And so far, there hasn't been a single whistleblower or anyone ever being paid to or killed to keep these truths suppressed. They're just so silly, and there's no evidence. I'm open to evidence. I'm as open to evidence as anyone is, but it hasn't been presented. What's been presented is just a bunch of logical fallacies and silly anecdotes.
Well, with the pharmaceutical industry, it's interesting to me because I feel like, and again, I mean, I keep saying the term "feel like," but obviously these are just beliefs, so I don't know how else to phrase it. But it seems to me that more people are skeptical of the pharmaceutical industry than they are of cigarettes almost. Like it's really weird to me because you're right. I have heard people just blazingly just throw out there like, oh yeah, the pharmaceuticals are doing this, or, like, I mean, I'm sure a lot of the same terms, you've heard that, vaccines can cause autism in kids and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seems like it's just really thrown out there as a matter of fact. People will just say that, at least I have heard that personally. Just, at a party or whatever, someone will just throw out a term like that. And it's like, oh, I mean, you just threw that out there like as if it was common belief. And to me, it seems weird. I mean, I haven't seen any polling, but it seems like more people are skeptical of, big pharma, so to speak, or the pharmaceutical industry than they are smoking cigarettes, or especially smoking weed. Like
I would probably agree with you. Yeah.
And I mean, how did that happen? How did the pharmaceutical industry, that's a multi-billion-dollar industry that spends millions of dollars, how have they done the worst? They have the worst brand image on the planet. Where's all that money going?
Yeah, and that's an interesting one too, because it's worldwide, although in kind of a different manifestation. If we go to sub-Saharan Africa and we take some of these countries where unfortunately public health emergencies are a way of daily life in some parts of many sub-Saharan African countries. A very popular version of the big pharma conspiracy theory is that things like AIDS drugs and vaccines secretly can contain birth control pills to try and wipe out black people. That's a very seriously believed conspiracy theory in Africa. And of course, the net result of that is that people don't take vaccines, so they don't take AIDS drugs. And these epidemics down there continue to spread because of this tremendous mistrust of drugs from Western countries.
Well, is that belief also coupled in Africa with the idea that America or the United States was the one that introduced AIDS to Africa? Because I know that's also a belief out there.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, there are government officials who will parrot these conspiracy theories.
That is something that I have kind of wondered though. Like, what is? I mean, I didn't necessarily believe that the United States government introduced AIDS to Africa, but what was the actual? How did Africa get AIDS? I guess how was AIDS actually introduced to the population of Africa?
I can't speak with a tremendous amount of expertise. This is outside of my line, but I do know that it crossed from apes to humans, and that's why it had a geographic start in Africa, because that's where the apes were. I don't recollect very many of the specifics about that, and would defer to the people who know it better. But that's where it started.
Because that's another one of those beliefs where I think, okay, you're saying that the United States introduced AIDS to Africa to wipe out the African population ostensibly, right?
Yeah, you could say the apes is a cover story,
Yeah, But then the idea again would be, okay, well, here we are, whatever, 35 years later. And I mean, we give billions of dollars of aid to African countries. And I don't know, to me, it just seems like, why would we, if we were going to try to kill them off, if we were going to kill them off, wouldn't we, I don't know, like actually succeed in killing them off? Like the population of a lot of these African countries has continued to actually rise.
Again, they're trivial to debunk, and you can throw the stuff out there all day, and you just keep hitting the same hammer, hitting the same nail with the hammer. It's like this part of the conspiracy theory makes no sense for this reason. Okay, well, the same applies to every part of the conspiracy theory, and to most other conspiracy theories too. It's people don't believe them because they sat down and rationally analyzed the evidence and came to this conclusion. People believe them because it's their tendency to believe them, and because having this kind of, it's very emotionally satisfying to be the one who has this secret knowledge, who has a superior level of insight to everyone else, because it kind of gives you a bit of a superpower, right? I now know these things that nobody else around me knows. I feel powerful as a result of that. So it's something that even if you don't consciously think that, it's something that is very psychologically appealing to us at a kind of an organic level.
I mean, I can totally see that argument. And I mean, I think that there is a little bit of that too. Like, I mean, I've listened to a number of videos on a variety of different conspiracy theories. And sometimes, I mean, some of the people talking sometimes will come off very pompous, or it's almost like an idea too where they'll build off each other, right? So I mean, you know about this, where you have one conspiracy theory and you build off another and you built off another, and then all of a sudden, you're your average guy on YouTube and you come across a guy that's like 4 steps in. So he believes that Illuminati control the planet, and then they believe that the Illuminati caused 9/11 to happen, and then 9/11 caused this thing to happen, and now you're on the 4th step, and you're like, whoa, like you really built up a lot of stuff for me to get here, and you sound like an expert when people are just, when somebody in a video is just throwing off information, it's, well, like you said, like the trade centers, well, this happened, and underground underneath the towers was 2,000-degree temperatures for 2 months, and this and that, and you hear some quote experts say something and you're like, wow, this sounds really smart and very scientific. It has to be true.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's kind of built upon each other, and then you throw in some numbers, and all of a sudden it seems like it just kind of confuses people.
Yeah, that idea of trying to make them sound scientific. That's something that's become increasingly popular. Is okay, they don't believe our conspiracy theories, so we're gonna get a bunch of scientists to say that. And like one of my favorite examples of that is going back to 9/11 truthing. You've got this what do they call it? AE 9/11 architects and engineers who doubt the 9/11 official story or something, and they've got it's a website where you can go and sign up your name, and they say they have, I don't know, however many, 3,000 or something. It consists almost entirely of people who have no architecture or engineering capability at all. They're or if they're engineers, they're software developers or something like that. I'm on there. Our dog is on there. Anyone can just put anything on there and they list it, and they try and claim that here's the list of professional structural engineers and architects who say 9/11 was an inside job. I mean, their efforts to make it sound like it's supported by scientists are very ham-handed and fairly pathetic.
That kind of reminds me of the History Channel, all their alien stuff, ancient aliens, this researcher or this scientist. And I think to myself, like, well, I guess anybody could be considered a researcher if you've done one shred of research. I guess you could say that. But yeah. They pull out these, I mean, especially like, an ancient alien theory. I don't know if that show's still making new episodes or not, but I mean, you see these guys and it says that, at the bottom, nuclear physicist, PhD. Oh, yeah. And then, and then they throw out something like, like there was one episode they did about Abraham Lincoln being visited by aliens, and that helped us, like the North, to win the Civil War. And I was like, oh my gosh.
I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah, that's true. One of their favorite experts, who they call a nuclear physicist, I won't say his name, but his background as a nuclear physicist is that one job he had when he was younger was he worked for the local utility company with a radon detector, and he would go down to your basement and see if you detected radon. So they could sell him, services to clean that up. So therefore, he's a nuclear physicist capable of talking about UFOs and space travel and all of this. It's often pretty sad, their efforts to lend themselves an air of legitimacy.
Well, I think even with that term, that because I'm pretty sure I know who you're talking about for the nuclear physicist guy. I just that was one thing I even thought when I was like 15 years old and I was watching the videos. I would think to myself, what does nuclear physicists have anything to do with aliens? Like, what's that connection, and why is that something to brag about? It's like, oh, I own a bakery and I'm talking about the Loch Ness monster. It's like, well, how are those two things connected?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point too. It sounds sciency, but we can take that whole concept too, and it extends in other interesting directions. One of the things that lends a UFO report the most credibility is that it was reported by a pilot. People say, oh, pilots are incapable of misidentifying anything they see in the sky. If you're a pilot, therefore anything you think is a UFO, more so than the average person. Where does that idea come from? I haven't any idea. There's no part of pilot training that includes telling what's an airplane and what's a flying saucer. That's not part of pilot training, and pilots are as fallible as anyone else. It's not like the fact that no UFO reports ever come from astronomers, even though they're the ones spending the most time looking at the sky. And the reason is astronomers know what the hell they're looking at. Pilots don't know what the hell they're looking at more than anyone else on the street would.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, they say that there's always that that level of like credibility where they say, oh, this retired U.S. pilot, whatever, in the Air Force saw this UFO, and it's like, oh wow, like so much credibility now that he saw it. Yeah, you're right. I mean, why does that make it all of a sudden true? I mean, that'd be like if somebody was driving on the street in their car and somebody said, oh, I was driving and I saw an alien walking on the street. I mean, would it have more credibility if it was a cop?
Well, it would if the alien was driving a car, because clearly anyone with a driver's license is trained in discriminating aliens from humans.
Exactly. That's a very good point. I mean, some of these things, yeah, you're right. They throw that out there, and it just it just sounds so credible now. Oh well, this person saw it, or Barry Goldwater said he saw an alien in 1970. It's like, Barry Goldwater, no one cares about what he says about anything in today's world, and all of a sudden now we're gonna believe aliens because he said it once.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know where that comes from, but I guess this does lead to another question in that obviously for a lot of these theories, I mean, some of them obviously are organic, but it does seem like there has to be some kind of vested interest in actually promoting these theories. Like, who are some of the agencies or websites or whatever that actually promote these things? And I mean, is it just for financial gain, or or all of these theories, are they all basically grassroots that just kind of just caught fire and just took off?
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, for financial gain. However, I want to quickly clarify that most of the authors who write these books or write these TV shows, they are honestly motivated by promoting what they believe to be true information. It's the TV networks who recognize that, hey, more people are going to tune into Ancient Aliens than to a real science show. The TV networks are interested purely in eyeball share because that's where their revenue comes from. They don't care. It makes no difference to their revenue whether the information they present is true or not. That's why you have all of these TV shows, the ghost hunting TV shows, The Curse of Oak Island, Hunting Hitler, Ancient Aliens, all of these shows, all the Bigfoot shows, these shows that are complete nonsense from beginning to end, are on the science networks because that's the most profitable programming. Now, I'm not trying to criticize the people who appear on those shows, because I believe most of them are honest in their belief. And I can tell you right now, none of them are making much money by being on that show. They're not doing it for gain. They think that they're doing it for the public education, the public good. I'm not criticizing the people. I'm criticizing the unfortunate situation is that what viewers want to watch is sensational programming, and therefore the studios are in the position of having to deliver sensational programming. That's sad. That's my motivation, is to find a way that science-based programming can be as interesting and as fascinating. And let me just throw out an example, if I might. You mentioned a Loch Ness Monster a little while ago. Well, we've all seen the Loch Ness Monster show over and over and over and over again. You know, blurry photograph this, anecdotal report of an eyewitness that. We've seen it 100 times. There's really nothing new there. However, if you look at the science-based reasons why such a creature as might be depicted in one of these photographs could not be a plesiosaur, that's when it gets to be really interesting. Mm-hmm. For example, the famous photo that's since been proven to be a hoax, and the people who made it have come clean with it, but the famous surgeon's photograph, just the head and the neck of what looks like some kind of a plesiosaur floating above the Loch Ness, the water. You know the picture I mean, right?
Yeah.
So here's the interesting thing. Okay, if that was a plesiosaur did not have neck muscles that would have allowed its neck to go in that direction. Also, like anything else swimming in the water, it would not have been able to lift that much meat up out of the water. Like if you're swimming, floating on your back or something, would you be able to stick a leg up and have it that high out of the water without, rolling over or sinking back down? No, it doesn't make sense from the perspective of buoyancy, and it doesn't make sense from the perspective of the anatomy of a plesiosaur's animal. I find those things interesting, and we could put together a whole show on Loch Ness about that. That's a show that I would actually want to watch, because that is all new stuff to the viewers. It's intriguing. It increases their curiosity to want to learn more about real science stuff. And it's true for whatever added benefit that might have. So you can make good programming as interesting and as eyeball grabbing as this bogus sensationalist programming. It's just much harder to do, but it can be done.
I mean, some of the shows out there, I mean, they're just so over the top. I mean, like you mentioned, Ghost Hunters and Bigfoot Hunters, in my mind, it's just so over the top. I mean, it really, like, I just think to myself, like, this is too far out there. I mean, at least with Ancient Aliens or JFK or whatever, you have, people that are calling themselves PhDs or master's degrees or whatever, and they're sitting down and, they sound like, maybe they might have this belief, but then, maybe they teach a course on whatever at some local community college. And it's like, okay, I can kind of get this one a little bit. But then, I mean, you cut to 15 guys in a house. Like, there's ghosts in this house, and I have a machine that registers ghost energy or whatever it is they call it. And I just think to myself, like, what on earth is this? Like, who watches this? And I mean, if they ever caught a ghost, why don't they show the ghost? And another thing too, I always think with all these Bigfoot things, that, okay, if they actually caught Bigfoot, if he exists and they caught him, that would make the news before that episode was ever aired. Like, that would make, you would see that on, like, I mean, CNN and Fox and MSNBC, they would have a whole segment about Bigfoot if he was captured. So, I mean, they're not going to reveal any news in these episodes. Those are the two shows that are those two, whatever, subsections of those shows or whatever topics that just really blow me away, that people actually watch them, and that the people on these shows, I mean, you're right, they're sincere and they're not lying. They believe it. I mean, obviously the producers think it's crap, but the people actually on the ground doing it believe it. But yeah, to me, it's wild. Those two are really wild.
I get calls all the time from TV production companies who are trying to put together a little pilot pilot or a pitch for a show that they want to take out to networks, and they want me to be one of the people on the show. And I'm very open to that if it's the right show and something that would make sense to do. But so few of these proposals that I get make any sense. And I'll talk about one just recently. There's a cave down in South America. I did a couple of podcast episodes talking about this, in which some people think aliens built this fancy library, and it's hidden in this cave, all this alien wisdom in this high-tech library in a cave in South America. Okay, now people have been going into this cave for centuries. There's nothing in the cave. It's a natural cave with nothing remarkable in it. And I'm talking to the producer on the phone. They were really motivated to have me be on the show. And I was open from the very beginning. I said, why do you want me to be on the show? Because, well, we want you to lend the idea some credibility. I said, okay, what are you actually going to make the show about? Because you're going to get down there and there is nothing interesting to point your camera at. If you're making a Bigfoot show, the producers have to know that there's not going to be a Bigfoot for them to film. If you're making a ghost show, there's not going to be a ghost. You're not going to get to put anything interesting on film. Well, how do those shows answer it? They just have people running around in the dark and acting like they're really scared and pretending they heard a noise or something. And they eventually came clean and told me that that's exactly what they were going to do with this show. They said all they would ask of me is, that I say, well, maybe we haven't gone far enough into the cave yet, or maybe it's under the water and maybe there is something around the next corner. We can't know that for sure. And I wasn't willing to do that, so I didn't pursue it. But there is nothing to point the camera at. That's the problem that these shows all have to deal with.
So whether they wanted you to go to the cave and act scared, or you look at a rock and you look at it and say, well, 10,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago, whatever, this rock used to be an advanced piece of alien technology that got converted.
I don't know. They're making the show, so we'll have to watch it when it comes out. I'm curious to see who they're going to get to. Well, I can tell you who they're going to get. They're going to get somebody who's, a true believer in the alien theory of the cave, and they're just going to call them a scientist or something.
I guess they'll get that. I don't know how to say his name. The Greek guy. I mean, he's not. Yeah. He's born in the U.S., but he's got the crazy hair and he's got like a Greek last name.
Right. We did it's a long time ago now, but we shot a TV pilot of our own where we had kind of this team of skeptical superheroes, actual doctors and scientists. And the idea of the show was, they get the bat signal and they go race to the scene of the pseudoscience to debunk it and hit it with some real science. Now, we learned a lot of lessons by taking this around to the networks and in all these pitch meetings that we had. Lesson number one is they said, okay, well, you're going to find that the paranormal explanation is the true one, at least some of the time, right? And we said, no. They said, well, but then the viewers, it's a foregone conclusion and there's nothing to hold the viewer's interest. And I go, oh, okay, that's an interesting lesson. And the other thing we learned is, well, all these doctors and scientists you've got, I'm sure they're great doctors and scientists, but we're going to fire all of them and hire them with 20-something ghost hunters and psychic mediums. There's no interest, there's no reason to have a real doctor or scientist on any of these shows because that doesn't lend the kind of atmosphere and the type of entertainment value that they're looking for. They want someone who is persuaded that the ghost does exist and it's just around the next corner.
That's really interesting what you mentioned about the psychics. And there was a while, I feel like a number of films and television shows presented the idea, oh, it's a psychic, a psychic's working with cops to solve murders or whatever. And I mean, I don't know. I've never heard of that. I wonder if that is like, maybe that has happened sometimes, but that to me just seems so far-fetched that you would even bring in a psychic that everybody believes are charlatans and are people that, give you such vague information. They read your hand and they say, oh, tomorrow you're going to have a really great day. You're going to meet the man of your dreams by next winter or something like that. And it's just so vague in general. And yet you put up a psychic on TV and they walk around the house, they stumble around the house and their arms stretched out saying, oh, something happened in this room and I sense something. And of course, something happened in every house. I mean, you go to a house that's 80 years old, you're bound to find a room that somebody got punched in or
Yeah.
somebody. I mean, you're bound to have something happen in every room of every house in the United States, unless the house was just built. Even then, might have been a guy that stepped on a nail when he was building building that room. I mean,
The funny thing about the police that hire psychics, and unfortunately, there are quite a few jurisdictions where whoever's in charge does happen to believe in that, and they will do it.
oh wow.
There's always criticism for it because they're wasting resources on that should be used to actually investigate the crime. But regardless, they still do it, and we occasionally will hear success stories that the psychic did help solve the crime. But when we go back and kind of do a post-mortem examination of how did that case actually get solved, we find that the psychic provided the same kind of vague information that they always do. Oh, the body is near water, or there's a tree, or, anything like this. And then after they actually do find the body from proper police investigation methods, then the psychics always say, "Oh yeah, I knew that. I did see. I said water, and the river is just 8 miles away." They always have this kind of this ex post facto rationalization that makes the psychic's performance seem valid in retrospect. That's pretty easy to do, and enough of these stories gain traction, and those are the ones that get reported on on Oprah or whatever. That it causes that belief to be perpetuated to some degree. And so I don't think we're ever going to see that go away.
I can totally imagine it. In the greater LA area, somebody says that the body's near water. Well, of course, the ocean isn't that far away if you're going by an 8-mile radius or 20-mile radius.
Yeah.
I mean, 15 million people live near the ocean. If you go by that logic, and yeah, you're right. It is very vague. And I can't believe that a number of police stations actually do that. I mean, that to me sounds totally nuts.
Now, many of these psychics honestly believe in their ability. Cold reading, which is that's the technique by which anyone can learn to give an apparent psychic reading. Most of these professional psychics have just kind of come to learn to do that subconsciously. It's not that hard. You're going off the cues that the other person responds to the things that you say, and it's easy to self-delude yourself into thinking your ability is real. But one thing that we always hear as evidence that these abilities are real is this Project Stargate, this thing that in the 1970s, where the CIA actually spent $20 million hiring some psychics to see if they could enhance intelligence information. And the major part of Project Stargate was they put these people who called themselves remote viewers into a room, and the story goes that they would say, oh, there's a Soviet bunker here, and there's a tree next to it, and there's a tank. And they'd have this remote viewing that would supposedly yield useful intelligence. And then when you go back and you read what the test protocol was, is that the remote viewer had a manila envelope full of photographs, actual spy satellite photographs, and they had to be alone in the room for a period of time with this envelope. And then only after that had taken place would they then sit down and say, oh, I can envision, and then they would describe what was in the photographs. Mm. The obvious thing that happened is they opened the envelope and looked at the photographs. So the Project Stargate people are generally considered by most skeptical investigators to have been deliberately fooling the CIA, not like honestly self-deluded individuals who call themselves psychics. These were people who knew exactly what they were doing, and they were defrauding the government. It's a terrible, terrible example of the success of psychic abilities, supposedly.
Wow, I guess if you're going to delude or defraud the government, you might as well at least trick yourself into believing it first. Don't just openly go in there like defrauding the government.
Well, but you look at people like Uri Geller. I mean, he does 4 tricks. He does 4 magic tricks. They're magic tricks that any magician can do. He does them well, but many magicians do them at least as well as he can. And he's built an entire career off of hoaxing people with these close-up magic tricks. The spoon bending the key, hiding the magnet in his mouth to screw up your compass. He's got this very limited repertoire of tricks, and he's just good at them. And to this day, he's got millions of believers around the world.
Wow. So there's one last topic I want to cover with you, and that is the idea of, like, what's the new or what's the emerging it girl, so to speak, for conspiracy theories? Like, is there one that you're seeing right now that's kind of gaining a lot of traction that maybe was really under the radar a couple years or so ago? Like, I think a perfect example would be, something like flat Earth. All of a sudden that went from nothing to huge. Is there something like that you're seeing now?
Well, yeah, and it would be tied to the current political climate, which is not, which is why it would not be a subject for my podcast. We're a nonprofit. Our stuff is educational. It doesn't have any political or religious content in it. For that reason, so it's something I stay away from. But it would be the whole QAnon conspiracy theory. It's something that's very closely tied to the Trump supporters, and it came from this forum on the internet called 4chan and 8chan, that are known for posting goofy satirical content. So anyone who knows anything about it knows that it began as a joke, essentially. And it's still not known who this person or persons are who call themselves Q. But they make sort of these predictions that, next week something is going to happen in the news. And, see, I was right. Last week something happened in the news. And it pretends to be a member of Trump's government in some secret capacity. Supposedly revealing all this information about how Hillary Clinton and the liberals are going to be arrested for all their crimes against humanity at any day now. And it's something that is being ravenously embraced at a growing pace by many of the sort of the far. I'm not trying to implicate all Trump supporters by any means, but the people on the far right, the alt-right, are ravenously embracing this whole QAnon phenomenon. Friends and I wonder who this person actually is. For a long time, I was persuaded that it was some liberal comedian who was having the time of his life just poing all of these people. But I've changed my mind now. I think it's probably someone who believes that these things are all true, who knows that Q doesn't exist, but believes he's still presenting an accurate and honest picture of what's going on, believes he's doing a public service by portraying this Q character to people.
Well,
that's what I think. I would love to know.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, that person really is. It seems like to me right now, I mean, they're kind of building up like a really big following, and it also, I mean, there's so much mystery to it. I mean, for him, I mean, I guess you could say it is an actual real conspiracy theory because this guy actually is saying stuff, but like you said, it's not like any new evidence. It's more of he's guessing and he's doing a little bit of analysis, and he's wrong on some stuff, he's right on other stuff. But I mean, when you're guessing the politics of the day, it's not super hard to be right about that on occasion, right?
I mean, the things he's right about are things that are already public knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you made a prediction to me and you said the stock market's going to go way up next year. I mean, if you're right, it's like the possibility of you being right is high, right? Or if you said something 100%. To me, if you said something to me, Donald Trump is going to have a peace treaty with North Korea signed by the end of next year. It's like, well, if you had told me that a year ago, I would have maybe been a little bit more skeptical of it. But now it's like, well, I mean, it could. It's totally within the realm of possibility that it could actually happen. So making those predictions, they're not risky predictions, it seems like.
No, they're not at all. A friend of mine, Mike Rothschild, is a writer, and he kind of analyzing all of Q's stuff has become sort of taken over his life. It's so popular, and he's the real expert in my book on everything that Q has predicted supposedly, and from his analysis, nothing has remotely come true that was specific enough to be even called a prediction. It's all been uselessly vague or wrong or things that were already publicly known anyway.
So a lot of Q stuff is similar to like Nostradamus then, when he said
Oh,
something,
dear God.
history will come from blah, blah, blah. And people are like, well, he meant Hitler.
Yeah.
It's like, did he mean Hitler? Because those are two different words. Why didn't he say Hitler then?
Yeah, that's Nostradamus is another thing that has unfortunately dominated more of my career than I would like.
Man, I feel like he was another guy too. It seemed like 10 years ago or 15 years ago was just huge. And I feel like maybe his popularity has waned a little bit. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But
they come and go based on what books or what TV shows are out.
I mean,
I don't think it's to do with, the public is more or less embracing of Nostradamus. I think it's just what happens to be in the media at the time.
That's probably true. I mean, I remember, again, 9/11, after that happened, maybe 2003 through 5. I mean, History Channel was releasing episodes of their shows where, they're talking about Nostradamus and they're talking about how Nostradamus predicted 9/11. And this is the History Channel. I mean, this isn't some guy on YouTube that just threw things together. I mean, this is History Channel that spent however much money they spend getting all these people together and editing the episodes and producing the episodes. I mean, they're putting that on TV. I mean, and they end the episode. Was Nostradamus correct? Some people believe so. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I would love to see an honest documentary about Nostradamus that, he actually didn't write anything in code. He never encoded anything. And it's the only people who say that are the authors who have come up with their own word substitutions and numerological schemes to transfer what he actually wrote into whatever that is that they want him to have said. But there's no evidence that he ever made any efforts to, encode or hide the meaning of anything that he wrote.
No, it's true. Well, Brian, I want to thank you so much for coming on today. How can we follow all of your work? How can we follow you on social media and online? Like, what are some places that we can check out your work?
Best place is the website for the podcast, skeptoid.com, or you can just find me, Brian Dunning, on Twitter or Facebook.
All right. Well, perfect. Well, thank you again so much for coming on. And there's so many topics that, I could ask you about, and I don't want this episode to go on forever. So potentially sometime in the future, I'd love to have you back on and maybe we could dive into some of these other topics that are I'm just thinking about it now, like, especially, posting this when some of the comments are going to be, you guys are Freemason lies. It's like, oh, geez.
Yep. It's all coming. Yeah, it's coming your way.
I mean, I know for myself, the Illuminati has never given me $1. I haven't gotten any money from them, so I'm not paid off at all.
But that's exactly what you'd say if they had been paying you.
Exactly. Maybe I am an agent. I don't know. All right, Brian. Well, thank you again so much for coming on, and talk to you soon.
Okay, I had fun. Thanks a lot.
All right.